All right, we're talking about Anatolia and the Indo-Europeans. Lastly, we will be talking about Africa. Well, we're going to be talking about different theories of civilization and how these theories are used for political, religious, and social movements. So, we're talking about more of a mainstream, more popular theory called out of Africa theory versus a more recent theory. Also, you have Mesopotamia, which is modern day Iraq, and the various Sumerian states like Uruk, and maybe cities like Ur, where Abraham from the Hebrew scriptures are referenced. And we'll also be talking a little bit about the Indus Valley. Lastly, we'll be focusing mostly on Anatolia and the Hittites. And if we look at this image here, this is going to be the symbolic representation of this article. And this is from the Hebrew Bible, where Noah had 3 sons. And according to the Hebrew Bible, the ark of the ark that carried uh, and saved humanity during the world flood. I believe this is in the book of Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew scriptures. And that ark that carried humanity and the animals landed at Mount Ararat. And there is some geological and different type of evidence that supports this claim, but we're just going to be looking at it as more of a interesting theory. And Mount Ararat is located in currently Turkey, which was ancient Anatolia. And for many linguists, geneticists, and people interested in anthropology and the beginning of civilization and history, many agree that the Indo-European language, which is made up of 50% of all languages worldwide, originated here in Anatolia and very close to where the Tower of Babel is located. Tower of Babel is located just south of Mount Ararat. And this was the beginning point of migration, where you had, um, according to Genesis, yes, we have our references here. Genesis 11 was the moment where, in theory, God established the different groups of people. You have the Europeans, the Asian, and the African. I think it goes without saying, but um, the process of evolution is worth mentioning because we know that things evolve. We just don't know what degree to which they evolve. You just simply look at plants, how it starts from a seed and then evolves with sunlight, water, nurturing, evolves into a plant and something else. Similar, humans evolve over hundreds and thousands and maybe millions of years. So we're going to be talking about the different groups of people, the different languages, the scientific and religious theories that attempt to explain what's going on. So let's get started. So, according to documentation and not theory, I do want to ask, when and where were humans first discovered? Not what do we think, or less of a theory, but more of a proof. I want to look at, when were the first peoples documented? When was writing first created? And who was writing and what were they writing about? I do like to think of the oldest languages such as Sanskrit, Egyptian, Greek, Hebrew. It's hard to conceive of a older civilization than Egyptians. The oldest civilization in the West, I would argue, would be either Anatolia or Greece. And we're just going to dive deeper into these different people groups, because it does seem impossible to find a theory that is both honest in its limitations and also not attempting to hide or overemphasize certain data for an ideological end. So hopefully that's what I will be doing today, is giving an honest description of a theory that also not only gives a rational explanation for where humans first were documented, but a theory that also explains in detail the theory's limitations. A theory is only as good as the limitations being described within it. I know Einstein is not the greatest intellect the world has ever seen. There's different theories on actually who was behind Einstein's brain. His wife was very intelligent, and Einstein's wife was a mathematician. And some would argue that it was actually Einstein's wife who came up with a lot of these ideas. But regardless, Einstein did say his space-time theories were limited, and he was open to being wrong about many things. And he discovered, by the end of his development of his space-time theory, he discovered big cracks and mysteries within his own theory, which is good. It's not good that there's cracks in the theory, but it's good that he's honest in the limitations. And hopefully I'm going to be doing that as well. Because many scientists overemphasize data for ideological ends. Different political groups such as the National Socialists and a 20th century Germany, World War II, and that whole theory of Aryan supremacy and Germanic cosmology. Those stories were based off of real data, but overemphasizing certain data. So we'll talk more about that, but that's just kind of the main idea of what I'm talking about here. So we can jump straight into trendy theories such as out of Africa. And some communities that participate within this theory, such as the Black Hebrew Israelites, I would argue do a very similar thing to what the National Socialists do, is they take real data and overemphasize certain parts while overlooking others. Why do they do that? Well, they do it for an ideological end. In the early 20th century, according to the National Socialist theory, the non-Aryans were bad and the Aryans were good. The non-Aryans did not create good civilizations, and the Aryans did create good civilizations. Now it's a little bit flipped to where the Aryans are bad and the Aryan civilizations are bad and oppressive and cancerous and parasitic, exploitive, and the non-Aryan nations are good. So things within theoretical practice and studies are always changing. So a lot of these theories are based on New Age or Gnostic communities, because we can see in today's age with the increase of distractions on media and how that's affecting people's identity. Because people are developing their identity based off of many things, but I think one of the biggest factor is based off of what they see online, and that's both good and bad. But one of the more popular theories online is this New Age and Gnostic movement, where these New Age and Gnostic movements give enough truth to attract people and keep the people participating in the community, but it's not the fullness of truth, is what I would argue. It's enough truth to get you interested, but not the fullness of truth. And it's based off of the idea that you take the literal word and the literal meaning of occult, which just means hidden. And even Christian thinkers, such as St. Thomas Aquinas, he didn't see the word occult as a pejorative. Occult just means hidden. There are many things that are hidden. For example, a computer programmer understands this deeply, hopefully conceptually, that a fifth grader can access the internet by clicking a icon and typing what they desire through a search engine. Pretty simple. It takes about 3 steps. Step 1, click the icon. Step 2, type in the search engine. Step 3, hit enter. But on the back end, a computer programmer knows there's a dynamic and complex mathematical polarity between zeros and ones, so input and output. And this dynamic of electricity, light, and darkness, and how this creates a digital screen. And this is all happening on the back end of the computer. So that programming and computer language is hidden from the user. So just because that program is hidden from the user, does that mean it's not real? Similarly, New Age and Gnostics take that approach that it comes from Plato's cave, that what you see is real. Like if you cross the street without looking, you could get hit by a real car and really feel pain. But there are higher forms of reality that we cannot see. So we'll talk more about that later. But this Gnostic religion goes hand in hand with these theories on human development and human discovery. Just simply because it's too easy to fall into analysis paralysis, where you don't have the wisdom to categorize the information you get online. So we have the African theories. Then you have the Indo-European theories, as I mentioned, with the white supremacy within the National Socialists. And I did mention, as above, so below, that Gnostic principle, what happens in the heavens happens on earth. And the more you study cosmology or an astrology, the more you actually understand what's on the ground. So the more you look up in the sky to the world that you cannot unsee, but you can have scientifically run experiments, you can analyze the angles and rotations of the planets. And from that, you can gain a different perspective, maybe on your personality, on the seasons, the weather. And all throughout history, humans have ordered their day-to-day practice and rituals based off of the heavens above. The Romans did this, the Greeks did this, the Aztecs did this, the Persians did this, the Indus Valley. So that's a big principle we want to think of. It comes from Hermeticism, very interesting subject within Gnosticism. So a lot of these theories are not random or trivial, but these theories do seem to be a temporary fad, because, as I said, if you study history, the development and the creation of humans within the broad universal consensus among people changes. Yes, there's going to be variations between all people, but I'm talking about a consensus. What do most people believe about the creation of humans and the development of civilizations? So this is totally worth examining because of the impact it has on someone's identity. And I guess someone can ask, why is identity important? Well, I would ask, who was asking, why is identity important? I would ask, why is anything important? Because you can kind of take many different frameworks, but I think of it more of kind of a dualistic, not fully dualistic, but I like to think of the world dualistically, similar to how the ancient Persians had it with Zoroastrianism, you had the light versus the darkness within the cosmos, having a perpetual dynamic and struggle for power. And so that being said, the more you understand about other people's history, your own history, I think the more you enter into the lightness and step away from the darkness. Because I see knowledge as light, as something good, um, which is why I think Gnosticism is very attractive for many people, including myself. Gnosis just means knowledge in Greek. So we want to get closer to truth and we want to get closer to the light. And identity has a big factor in this ascension to reality. It's very Platonic. Again, in the real world, what we see and what we touch, whether at work or school, we can enter into self-cognitive bias where the mind can think of incredible things, and just because the mind can think of certain things doesn't mean that the mind is aligned with what is real. So we want to avoid self-cognitive bias, and we want to invite and walk closer into truth. And that involves this spiritual practice of gaining knowledge and rejecting passion or pain. And I'm saying this because, again, identity is important, but this also streams into how groups of people run their military, how they run their economy, how they make political decisions. So this might seem too theoretical and abstract, but these theories deeply penetrate our identity, and our identity affects our decisions. So I will admit that this is a very elementary article and talk on early civilization, but I will keep gaining more knowledge, hopefully, and give a more sophisticated and technical analysis. But this is just kind of like a gateway drug into history and early civilizations. Because my main goal in doing this is truth. And Plato thought truth was one of the three transcendentals of God. Truth brings you closer to the one, to the source, to the principle of the eternal forms. Truth, goodness, and beauty. And so everyone has their own understanding of truth. And that's what I call it, conscience. Everyone has a conscience, so everyone has their own understanding of truth. So hopefully this talk will allow you to accept what is true according to your conscience. And hopefully this will also give you a different way of thinking to avoid analysis paralysis. I'll be talking about ways you can do that later, but this is for people with African ancestry. Because if you look in America with the African Americans, it's a very complicated and I would say kind of a dark history with the African Americans. Many to this day don't have a proper surname because of the slave owners giving the African Americans their own name. So there's this deep sense of lost identity. How do I know this? I just said that there's groups like the Black Hebrew Israelites they're on the street with these purple and elegant robes, and they're quite aggressive in their rhetoric. And um, you have groups like that, but then you also have many African American Christians into certain Protestant communities, such as Baptist groups, Pentecostal groups. So you have a wide variety. It's not very unified, and this is just religiously speaking. We can even talk politically. You had MLK, and then you had Malcolm X and Marcus Garvey. And the question with these great men, I would say, especially Marcus Garvey, is trying to answer this question on what is African American identity. That was their movement, and thousands of people followed them. So this is not a, as I said, abstract or a theoretical concept. You can see these people, such as Black Hebrew Israelites. You can see the Baptists and Pentecostals, and take a step back and study the differences between these groups. And of course, you have different African American atheist movements and Gnostic movements. So it's, as I said, it's not very unified within the African American community. But this is also for people with European ancestry, because many would argue similar to the African Americans, but in a totally different way. The European Americans have a sense of lost identity as well, because the European Americans come from Europe, but they now live in America. For example, you had German immigrants moving into America not that long ago, along with Italian immigrants moving into America. Well, Germans and Italians don't speak English, they speak German and Italian. In addition, the Germans and the Italians had different languages, but also different religions, especially the Italians being mostly Catholic, and the American founding religion, according to the founders in the first 13 states, were Protestant. And so you have European peoples moving into America and dissolving their European identity and replacing it with an American identity. And again, the question is, well, what's the American identity for the African? What's the American identity for the European? And lastly, we'll talk about the Asian ancestry. This is going to be a little more complicated, and I will admit I'm much more limited in my knowledge of Asia, but certainly the early Chinese helping with the railroads, and now in modern day you have many Indians helping in tech industry, service industry, many people from the Philippines now moving into America. So the same question applies to them as well. And so I'm going to be talking about science, and I love science because it improves our life. But science also is not good because, as I said earlier, a lot of data can be skewed for political purposes. And that's why science can be bad. So I'm thinking about different destructive religious and political cults or communities, because they use different propositions to justify the means of certain actions. And the human bias, as I mentioned, is larger than any PhD or academic king or academic queen, because the knowledge one has can be used to unify a nation or destroy a nation. So it is impossible to be a true scientist if one doesn't pray. And this is how I'm my first solution to the problem of identity and cognitive bias and inner conflict and analysis paralysis is praying. Or you can also say stillness. If you study the Hesi cats, which translates in Greek to quietness, it's a practice within the monks in the Orthodox community, and it's a very elaborate system of asceticism and detaching from the earth. And the question is, why do people do this? Well, if you look at all the civilizations, the greatest civilizations from Anatolia to Persia to Rome, tell me which one of those civilizations did not have rituals. And I know you can't respond, but the answer is all of them had rituals. And ritual is just a form of prayer. And so I think it's foolish that modern men, many have rejected prayer simply because of the Francis Bacon, as I mentioned before, and the Enlightenment movement, which I blame mostly to the European intelligentsia, fully rejecting God and accepting empiricism and replacing God with science. Instead of having science and God working together, which is more of a Gnostic, Hermetic, alchemical perspective, which is what I'm arguing for. Gnostic and alchemical studies is fruitful, but it's not the fullness of the truth, but it's certain Gnosticism and Hermeticism is kind of a good start to help understand this question of identity and so forth. So that's what I'm saying. Science and religion are synonymous. And Isaac Newton is a good proof of this. He wasn't just a scientist, he was a shaman, because Newton wrote more about religion and this hidden teaching within the cosmos through alchemical methodology. And what do I mean by alchemical? I'm talking about science and religion working together. You had this theory in medieval Europe rising, where many intellects and thinkers and philosophers were searching for things such as the philosopher's stone, creating gold from lead. And while this is a interesting and helpful scientific endeavor, it's also a theoretical and religious theory, because you can say something like developing one's character is similar to iron being smelted in fire and being refined, because building your character, it takes time and it's hard work, because of the passions, and by passions I'm defining as pleasure and pain. And many people try to avoid that, especially within the Gnostic group, because they want to ascend to higher reality. They reject the pleasure, they reject the pain. Look at practices such as Tantra. It's very interesting, little uncomfortable, but it involves intimate practices to gain knowledge. So quite fascinating. And Isaac Newton certainly practiced religion. And I'm saying, well, how come we got into this empirical, rational, modern idea when Isaac Newton himself rejected empirical, rational science, such as Hume or Francis Bacon? So I want to go back to Genesis 8. Then the ark rested on the Mount of Ararat. And I mentioned how human beings are both tribal with distinct language and genetics, but they're both simultaneously universal and united in consciousness. This is the paradox that is worth thinking about. And I mentioned I'm very interested in the language because I feel like religion is the first supreme item of identity, and under religion you have language. And so I would argue that one's phenotype, one's hair color or shape of their nose or skin color is way down below on that list of identity hierarchy. As I mentioned, religion's number one on the identity hierarchy, and language is two on the identity hierarchy. And I would say phenotype maybe 5 or 6. But phenotype is the first thing people notice in other people. And phenotype is a reality, but it doesn't encompass the fullness. So if you want more of a full picture of an identity, you have to study the religion. And once you get a decent grasp of religion, you have to understand the language. Because the language is what makes humans distinct from other living creatures. The rational soul is also synonymous with language. Because the ancient Greek philosophers and Stoics talked about logos, which is the rational language or word that binds the cosmos. So language is logos. And that's what's unique about human beings. So why not study that? So we have Sumerian, Egyptian, Akkadian, Hittite, and Greek. These are the first documented languages known to man, even older than Sanskrit. Now, since the rational soul of man allows for this participation in logos, as I mentioned, I am willing to entertain every theory that comes in front of me. Why? Well, because I want to be like Aristotle, who said, more or less paraphrasing, a wise man will entertain every theory without fully submitting to. So today, those of you on this journey with me will do precisely that. We're going to entertain every theory without necessarily accepting every theory. Maybe we will, maybe we won't. It depends on what we discover. So the out of Africa theory is kind of based off of the 70,000 BC time window, which in itself is quite a fascinating claim. And maybe we'll see in the next 5 years, 50 years, 500 years. But the world is much later than this, or this is way past what we actually have in the creation of civilization. So you kind of have a old earth creation, you have a new earth creation. When was earth created? And maybe it always has existed. And the Greeks had their own theories on this, and I think the Greeks were the best at trying to tackle this question, and we need to return back to the Greeks. We do have different migration datas and proofs showing patterns of different Homo sapiens and variations of this subspecies, such as Neanderthals and Homo erectus. Um, and this data does suggest that Africans have been around longer. But I want to turn back into the origin of languages and how Genesis 8:4 shows the universality of the Indo-European language. And we know an idea within many religious communities, this idea that God chose a specific group of people. And that certainly affects the way those groups of people interact with each other. For example, we go back to our picture. The Shemites, or sons and daughters of Shem, were also the Israelites and Hebrews and the Semitic peoples. And hopefully most of you know that the Hebrew scriptures theme was God chose the Hebrews for a specific purpose, to bring light and to bring God to the world, to the Gentiles, to the non-Hebrew people. So all of Shem's descendants, according to that Hebrew tradition, received that blessing of God, that chosenness. While sons of Japheth, sons and daughters of Japheth, take a similar idea from the Shemites and take that idea from the gospel, which is rejected by the Shemites. So the Shemites accept the Torah, and the first books of Moses, but they don't accept the gospel like the Japhites do, or the Europeans. Again, I'm not saying every Shemite believes in the Torah, or every Japheth, every son and daughter of Japheth believes in the gospel, but generally, most Europeans are Christian, and most Semitic people are practicing Jews. So this is an interesting dynamic. And Ham, we have Ham here at the bottom, where does Ham play in this story? Well, similar to Japheth, I would say Ham is more similar to Japheth than Ham is similar to Shem. Shem is its own unique character, and if you read the gospel, there's a part where the blessing of Shemites, the blessing to the Pharisees and to the Jews, is passed on to a more worthy group of people that produce the fruit thereof. I'm paraphrasing, but just claiming you are a certain group of people based off your genetics is not good enough according to the gospel. And so sons and daughters of Ham adopt more of that gospel understanding of the cosmos versus the Shemites. You're chosen based off of your DNA. That's rejected by the Japheth and Ham. And my proof of that is the Egyptian and Ethiopian church. Just as old as the European church in Rome and Germany and in France and Spain, you have the Egyptian and Ethiopian church in full communion with each other, and as old as Saint Mark himself, which was one of the apostles during Christ's time. So 70 AD, Egyptians and Ethiopians were Christian. So that's the three dynamics going on here. We'll return to that later, but zooming out of the religion and zooming into linguists. And so this is the diagram of the son of Japheth and the languages and the logos developing within this particular group of people. It's very interesting to see how both people from Iran and people from India are linguistically similar to people from Norway, people from France. Now, again, reject that idea that the Hindi and Indian peoples are different in their looks than the Norwegians, so therefore they do not share any kind of similarities. I would reject that fully because we know with genetics and the genetics new findings that, especially within groups like the Yamaya, that there was a lot of mixing between groups of people. And even within the more homogeneous groups of people, there was even mixing within them too. So I'm saying there's a mix genetically, but also within the language, because we can track the Hindi language and the French language all the way back to an original source, the Proto-European from Anatolia. So I mentioned all these Indo-European languages, and as I said, the Yamaya people was an embodiment of this structure of logos, is what I would call this. Because the Yamaya were both people from the steppes, so the Eurasian region. They were part hunter-gatherer European ancestry, but also had ancestry from the Caucasus region. So they were already a mix between these hunter-gatherer groups and people from the Caucasus region. And they were one of the most homogeneous groups, the Yamaya. And even then, they were mixing with other people. And you'll see later Yamaya mixing with the corded ware, which was the Western Europeans. So you have the Yamaya moving east from the steppes to now as far to Norway and Scandinavia and France, simply because they were nomadic people. They were traveling through horses and were the first peoples to domesticate the horse, based off of their language and having many different words for horse and for wheel, and were actually very lactose tolerant. They drink a lot of milk, and these people were very tall, and their bones were big compared to other people groups. As I said, they were drinking milk and developing larger bodies and developing a lactose tolerance. So I'm going to end this article with the mystery of the Yamaya people and their admixture. As I said, they're a mix between the Eastern hunter-gatherers and the Caucasus hunter-gatherers, with a little bit of Anatolia genetics as well. So all this being said, more data comes in each day. More theories are developed each day. But how are you going to develop your identity based off of this information? I hope that you will study as much as you pray. And if you're only spiritual, you're only praying and you're not studying, that's foolish. And if you're only studying and not praying, that's equally foolish. Thank you for tuning in today.